Welcome. We may finish this Sicha, this talk, this essay today. We may not. We're up to the answer, the explanation as to why didn't anybody, basically with very few exceptions, why didn't anybody do anything in the realm of the 7 Noahide commandments, of promoting them, etc., for at least the past hundreds of years, until the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach came along and introduced it and made a whole big deal out of it and made it a formal campaign for the Jewish people, for his followers, for his disciples, and anybody who's going to listen to him, to go out and teach and promote, etc. So we are, to remind everybody, in Likutei Sichois, volume 26, and now we're on page 141, top of the left-hand column, by the Tess, which means the 9th section in this particular Sicha, in this talk. So, by now, you may already know the answer, either because you know it from whatever different places you heard it, or over the time I may have said it or alluded to it in one way or another. But this is what we're at right now, inside, ready to explain it. So right before we get to where we're at right now, there is footnotes 67 and 68. 60, and we're going to go back to 66 as well, because it's very important for the Jews, and you'll understand why I want to share it with you. 67, I've spoke about a number of times recently, with a lot of excitement, emotion, and even passion. And I'll remind you what it is, then you'll remember. For those of you that are not new, you'll understand what I'm talking about. That's 67. Let's go back to 66 rather. Okay, footnote 66. After he said in the actual text itself, in the talk itself, based on everything that he explained until that point, that it is actually an obligation, a responsibility for any and every Jew that has the opportunity, that has the ability to see to it, to influence, even though that's not really the accurate translation, but we're going to leave it for now, to influence any and every non-Jew that he can reach and influence to keep their 7 commandments. All right. So on that, there's a footnote, and he references a book called Sefer Hasidim, which goes back hundreds of years. And there it says, if a person, referring to a Jew, sees a non-Jew committing a sin, if he's able to protest, if you can stop him, then the Jew has an obligation to do so. In other words, the unfortunate, all too common attitude of, I'm going to mind my own business, that's unacceptable. So for a Jew, between a Jew and a Jew, that everybody knows, or everyone should know. One of the 613 commandments is for a Jew to reprimand and to rebuke his fellow Jew, and to stop him from committing a sin, or to reprimand him. And there's lots of details about that, when to do it, when not to do it, how to do it. But basically, the commandment is, and then it goes into a whole concept of there's responsibility that every Jew has for every other Jew. And all the Jews are in it together. So really, as a general rule, with of course exceptions, as most rules have, as a general rule, the attitude for a Jew to take and say, I'm going to mind my own business, is inappropriate. You don't have a right to mind your own business. The other person's business is your business in this context. But if you ask a Jew, even a learned Jew, what about if you're observing a non-Jew about to or transgressing one of his 7 commandments? Well, then many people would have the attitude, hey, he's not Jewish, I'm going to mind my own business. So in the Sefer Hasidim, it says that's not so. the Jew is obligated, and he brings an interesting proof. You all know the story. It's that God sent Jonah the prophet, to Nineveh. And Nineveh, of course, which contained in it many, many people, was not a Jewish population. And yet, God sent a Jewish prophet there. So instead of saying that was an exception, he's actually using that as the rule, and for us to learn from there. So there we see it, that if a Jew has the ability to be influential, he's obligated to do so. That just supports everything that we've been saying until now. The examples given are, if a Jew is in business and the non-Jew needs the Jew for financial purposes, and therefore he's more than just tolerant, he needs the Jew, and he'll listen to what the Jew has to tell him. So therefore the Jew cannot just utilize his acquaintance and his interaction with this non-Jew for them both to be happy and make money off of each other, but you have to utilize your position to promote these 7 Noachide commandments. All right. And then he brings down another much more recent source, the Chassam Sofer, who states that a Jew is not allowed to cause a non-Jew to stumble in serving God, to do something that he's not allowed to do. And then he says, you actually have a mitzvah, you're required to instruct them, to guide them. Not only to wait for them to come and ask for the Jew's guidance and help, but unsolicited advice. Okay. Footnote 67. What's very strong about it is, as the two words that are highlighted, that it is Maise Rav, meaning to say that not only is it something which is theoretical or academic that we're discussing, but actually we have a rule in the Talmud that when it comes to a sage, a rabbi, teaching, not always are the pupils and the disciples to act based on what he taught, because he may have been teaching it on a particular level, which is not the final practical version of halacha, of Jewish law. So therefore, don't make a mistake and don't behave according to what he taught you, unless he's teaching you practical halacha, Jewish law, or unless he tells you, go do so. So there's lots of details, and the Talmud is quite clear on it, so that people don't make mistakes. What's the strongest proof or the strongest teaching that shows me, the student, the recipient, that I am supposed to behave in a certain way? And that is called Maise Rav, which means the behavior of the teacher, his conduct. That is the strongest proof. So if in any subject or topic in Jewish law, we're discussing something, and then I see my teacher, rabbi, doing something and behaving according to a particular opinion, well, that's the greatest proof that that's what you're supposed to do, because we're not just in the study hall, in the classroom, or hearing a lecture or a debate or an argument or the back and forth and the give and take, but he's actually behaving like that. There you have it. So just make up an example, because I don't want to get too carried away and I don't give you a real example. But let's say there is a certain prayer or something where there's a debate whether you're supposed to say it standing or sitting. Okay. Some say you must stand, some say you must sit. And there's all sorts of arguments to each side, and they make a whole big thing. And then I observe that my teacher, my rabbi, the authority in Jewish law, happened to be standing. And when he got to that part of the prayer, he was looking for a seat, looking for a chair, and it wasn't really too available. And he walked all the way down to the other end of the room, and he found a chair, and he sat down, and he said that prayer, and then he got up. So that was quite obvious. It wasn't like, oh, he wasn't feeling well, or he was weak, or he says you can say it sitting if you wish. No. The way I witnessed the entire scenario, he, by example, showed me that you're supposed to sit. So that's stronger than any argument and anything I hear from him, even if he explains to me all the reasons for sitting. That may not be his final verdict when it comes to actual practical behavior. Anyway, so this proof, in a sense, is stronger than all the other sources that we're bringing, in a sense, because this is Ma'aser Rav. This is actual, historic, factual conduct of one of the greatest rabbis, and he's known by the acronym of his name, the Chida. Chaim Yosef David Azulai, the Chida. And the story is that gives all the details how he met this particular non-Jew while he was traveling. He did a lot of traveling, this rabbi. So I told this non-Jew that he should tell me, what does he believe? Tell me his real belief. And he told me that he believes in the God of Israel. And I inquired, I interrogated, I really went into it, and I was convinced that so it is. He's saying the truth. He convinced me. And I told him, if so, in the morning and in the evening, say the verse of Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, and fulfill the 7 commandments. And be careful not to have shituf in any way, shape, or form. Not to use any other intermediates, and don't mix anything with the one and only God, but rather absolute oneness of the God of Israel. And he accepted it, and he said that he will not pray to anyone other than the God of Israel. So that one incident, or that isolated story, speaks volumes on a practical level. And the bottom line is that, again, don't look at it and say, oh, that's an exception. That was an exceptional person. Or try to find out what was the exception there. Who was that non-Jew? He was really receptive. And who was that Jew? Oh, he's such a great rabbi. So coming from him, no. That's not the way to go. We're taking it the other way. We're saying this was a Jew that we could learn from his behavior. Every Jew is supposed to learn from his behavior. And what did he do? He took a random non-Jew that convinced him that he believes in God, and he told him about the 7 Noach commandments, and even had him say the Shema morning and night. Okay. Footnote 68. It is forbidden for a Jew to assist a Noachite in adding to the 7 commandments. And the Jew is obligated to withhold them from sinning. And that applies nowadays as well, because of what we're saying, based on the Rambam Maimonides, that he makes no distinction, and he does not bring in the concept of the ger toishav when it comes to the obligation of the Jews influencing the Noachites, the non-Jews, to keep their 7 laws. It has nothing to do with whether or not we have ger toishav and we can accept ger toishav or not. That's not the point. As long as there's a Jew, there's a non-Jew, and he can influence him, he is obligated to. Okay. So now that brings us to the question, since Maimonides rules that it's an obligation, we were commanded by God Almighty at the giving of the Torah, at the revelation at Sinai, to force / compel / influence. Even nowadays, doesn't matter when. So why, A, is this not an explicit law in the Code of Jewish Law or in the commentators on the Code of Jewish Law? There is a book of several volumes called the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law for the Jew during the time of exile. And there are many commentators in the margins, on the sides of this book. No one speaks of the obligation of the Jew to see to it that the non-Jews keep their 7 Noahide commandments. Why? Furthermore, this commandment obligates any Jew that's in the position that he's able to, that he must do it. Now, in earlier generations, there were many Jews that did have the ability to do it with certain, they were under conditions they could. So they surely had to do it. Furthermore, as we now know, the more one gets involved in this, the more questions arise. There's so many practical questions. Well, then, where are all these questions and answers? Throughout the generations, there is what's called Shailas v'Shuvois, responsa, questions and answers. Simple Jews, laymen, scholars, rabbis would write questions to greater rabbis, to leading authorities, and ask them questions. In Jewish law, they would send back the answer, and ultimately these got published as books of questions and answers. And then you have the questions and the answers. This has been going on for over 1,000 years, to this very day. Okay, we have libraries with just those types of books called responsa in Jewish law. We don't really find much, very little, of such questions that were asked. Why? We have so many questions, and it's difficult for us to figure out what are we supposed to do. As you all know, we discussed this, and we're not alone. So many obvious questions come up when you try to actually keep the 7 commandments in a practical way. So why don't we find these books? What happened? So, says the Rebbe, Melech HaMashiach, the answer is as follows. Historically speaking, it is known in Jewish history of the past generations even in countries where converting to Judaism for a non-Jew to become Jewish, where it was not forbidden by the government, it was not illegal, still Jews were super careful that anything they do should not be misconstrued or misinterpreted or misunderstood as an act to try to assist somebody in conversion. For the most part, it's fair to say that close to 100% of the countries, even where Jews had it good, and there were throughout history, nonetheless, they didn't appreciate Jews if proselytizing, which we don't do, and Jews trying to influence non-Jews to convert to Judaism, which anyway, as we've discussed, we really don't. So therefore, if the Jews are going to try to bring religion, belief, prayer, you name it, to the non-Jewish world, all of a sudden all these red flags go up. Oh, they're trying to influence, which is true, the non-Jews, which is true, to become Jewish. No, that's not so. They wouldn't make that distinction. And now that is in the better situation. That's in a positive scenario. How much more so when, for the past 2,000 years, for the most part, most of the Jews were living in countries that were very antagonistic, if not worse, and did not appreciate in any way. And of course, you have many cases where, going to the extreme, where there were blood libels, and they fabricated lies, whether it's the Jewish people needing blood of Christian children for their baking of the matzahs for Passover, or whatever other rubbish and nonsense and lies they made up. So go in such a time for a Jew to try to speak to his neighbor about what he's supposed to and not supposed to do, religiously speaking, that ain't gonna fly. So if you did have a cordial or a healthy relationship, and you did have business associates, and even if you were in an influential situation where they needed you and they were ready to hear what you had to say, you stayed away from preaching any type of religiosity for your own safety, and if you're not worried about yourself, for the safety of your Jewish community. So that's really the way it was. And actually, and this is perhaps we could say, doesn't really say this in this talk. I don't want to misrepresent it. It's the golus, the exile mentality of the Jew, and you can't blame him really, because we've only been here for almost 2,000 years, so we're conditioned. It's not like, oh, we're the first or second generation. This goes back so many generations. So the mentality of the Jew, of the learned, observant Jew, is, I'm so happy if I have freedom of religion, if they leave me alone, if they allow me to keep my religion without any restrictions, I am so appreciative and so happy. And that's it. And we think that's great, which it is. And we think, I don't have to do any more. I don't need any more from them. Live and let live. Thank you so much. That's not true. No. I cannot mind my own business. My business is their business. Now, the thing is, though, is a Jew supposed to endanger his life for this? No. There's certain things where a Jew is obligated to even put his life on the line. But this is not one of them. So therefore, because practically speaking, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, was only written some 500 years ago, in the midst, during the time of exile. I mean, it was written in Israel, in the land of Israel, but saying in the time of exile, there's no mention. What's the point? We can't. And the whole point of the Code of Jewish Law is practical Jewish law. It's not practical. But now, and when I say now, it's primarily, not exclusively, but primarily, once the majority of the Jewish people settled in the United States of America, that's where most of the Jews live currently as well. And if I may say so, after the dust settled, not right after World War II, after the Holocaust, but a decade or two later. Once the dust settled, so to say. And now that there's true freedom of religion for the Jews as well in the United States, and we're in a free world, and then, of course, many other countries as well. So now the situation has changed. The face is a different face. Therefore, the rules didn't change. The law didn't change. The application did. Now we're finally able to do that which Maimonides rules and writes some 800, 900 years ago, where in his day we couldn't do it either. But as I discussed, Maimonides writes all of Jewish law, whether or not it's applicable. That's what's unique about his Mishnah Torah. So therefore, now, to say the least, the Jews have no excuse of not trying to promote and influence the non-Jewish world to keep their seven. Now, that's basically the answer. And the times have changed, and now we have the opportunity. And at the very least, the Jew needs to utilize every such opportunity. So every time a Jewish person has a business dealing with a non-Jew, and they have a dialogue and they have a discussion, they should not only talk about business or socialize, but the Jew is required to somehow bring in this. And that also applies in government. Now, a campaign, we can call it that the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach started actually way before he started the 7 Noahide Commandment campaign. And it actually started in the 50s, and that was prayer in public schools. But then there was a lot of opposition and a lot of arguments, and people said, well, if you tell them to pray, so then what's going to be the text? And we want it to be non-denominational, and this. Okay, so then, in order to get everybody on board and that there shouldn't be any that it shouldn't be any negativity, it shouldn't lead to anything which is not proper in the text, so then it became a moment of silence. And to promote a moment of silence. And again, your typical average, observant, learned Jew would have the attitude as follows. Leave me be. I'm happy that I live in the United States. It's a free country, and that I can send my children to private Jewish schools, and the school can basically run as we see proper, and we want to do according to Jewish law and custom. I'm not going to tell you what to do and not to do in your public school system. None of my business. I feel sorry that so many Jewish children go to public school. Sorry about that. That's the exile mentality. That is not the right approach. That is absolutely the wrong philosophy. The Rebbe Melech HaMashiach teaches us that we do have a responsibility. The non-Jews surely have a responsibility to know what's going on and to try to make a change for the better in the public school system. And even the Jews and even the religious and observant Jews that think they have nothing to do with the public school system, not only because it will affect me and my community, because if I have a bunch of wild criminals coming out of the school system, well, then we're all going to get hurt. So therefore, for my safety, I want them to be educated. That's still selfish. Better than nothing, of course. But no, it's for them. That's the approach. That's the mind, the shift that we have to make. The Jewish mind has to make this shift and realize that we have a responsibility towards the non-Jewish world. And therefore, what goes on in public school, what they teach, what they say and what they don't say is crucial and relevant for them. And getting back to what we discussed in the previous class, that the Jewish people have a message, have a mission to give over to the non-Jewish world. And therefore, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach spoke many, many times when in those days, in the 80s, when it was on satellite, about a moment of silence, how important it is, and to push that that the law be passed, and that every public school should start off the day with a moment of silence. And he basically answered all the questions one can have. For instance, He says, what are you supposed to think about during that moment of silence? And if you're afraid, well, the teacher or the instructor or the principal might tell you their personal beliefs, which may not be in line with the 7 Noachide commandments. It may not really be acceptable. So therefore, just like in many cases, the children bring their own lunch to school without a lunch program. The children have the mother prepares a lunch, and the kid comes with a lunch bag or a lunch box and has his lunch. That is physical food. So too, spiritually speaking, the kid comes home. He says that in school, we start off the day with a moment of silence. What am I supposed to think about? And let every family tell the child what they want. So at least, you have it like that. So it's very important that we do teach and influence. Okay, then the next piece, the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach goes into a whole question of, we know that the Jew is supposed to be careful with doing business with a non-Jew because we don't want to cause the non-Jew to take an oath or to swear in the name of his idolatrous God or what have you. So he deals with that as well, how to avoid that problem. But basically, it's very clear that times have changed, and it is important to teach these 7 commandments and to stress that they're God-given, not just because they are moral. And then government could pass laws, as they do, various different states, and also the Senate. We know that on the 11th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, they recognize that. I think the first president was actually Jimmy Carter who did that. Yeah. And ever since, if I'm not mistaken, every single president of the United States recognizes officially the 11th of Nisan, which is the birthday of the Lubavitcher Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, as Education Day USA. And it's very, and especially a president like Ronald Reagan, the statements that he's made. So it is definitely important, and times have changed. And it's really interesting because in Maimonides' work, where everything is so precise and so exact, even the order of the laws he puts in. So in the laws of kings and their wars, which is, as I mentioned, the last of the 83 subjects. So the final chapters, 8, 9, and 10, which speak about the 7 Noachide commandments, and after that, there's only 2 more chapters, 11 and 12, and that's the end of the entire Magnum Opus. The last 2 chapters are about Mashiach, redemption, and right before that is the 7 Noachide commandments. So it really fits that the world is changing in a positive way right now, the past number of decades, and therefore now that we're entering the era of Mashiach, is actually, you could find on video, someone in English, I'm pretty sure a non-Jew, approached the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach around the late 1980s and asked him, what is your message for the non-Jewish world? And then he asked him, do you believe that we're close, that we've entered the era of the Messiah? And the Rebbe HaMashiach responds and says, long ago, and that the message for the non-Jewish world is that they need to keep the 7 Noachide commandments in order to make this world a peaceful world and bring about Mashiach. All right. Obviously, we didn't do everything inside, but that was like sort of an overview of the end of the Sikha. And perhaps you have some questions, and the answers would be the parts that I left out. But, we're open for discussion now. And I hope that it's clear that now times have changed and we're at a very, very special time where even the Jew is obligated to promote the 7 High Commandments. How much more so, of course, the world itself within themselves. And there's only, how many billion, 6, 7, 8 billion people that have to keep these laws. So we have our job cut out.
Yes.
Go ahead. Who is that?
This is David.
Yes.
Hi, I was going to say, it was a very, very interesting study today that you had, and information about how, of course, it would have to be concealed. And I'm a history buff, especially in the Stalinist era and the Lenin era, the Nazi era, so many different eras, Spanish. It's been a real slog. And now, thankfully, the United States, and I'm proud that my family took an active part in fighting that war and bringing on victory. And
Which war is that?
World War II.
Who in your family was active in
My
that?
grandpa.
Where he's an American?
William Leftwich. He was in the Army Air Corps. He retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1965. Wow. He hated the Nazis. He thought they got off too easy. He wasn't a fan of he thought the Marshall Plan was too forgiving. And he took meteorological readings when they nuked Japan too, stuff like that. Some of the stuff he had a bunch of classified documents. It was interesting. I have a picture of him right here, actually, with his unit. Let me see if I could get this. Let me flip the camera around here. I could just do it this way. That's him in the back there. He was young. He lied about his age to get in.
Can't see anything.
Yep.
You don't see it?
All right.
Nope,
well, that's
not from my end. But I'd like to beg your pardon, everybody.
All you see is me.
No, I was just saying, I beg your pardon. It's so interesting that this gentleman is a patriot and a nationalist and it supports everything. I think it ties into what you mentioned about the end of World War II with a lot of refugees, so to speak, coming to Illinois. And I think Illinois and the Midwest has been welcoming, and it's been a pleasure, to host those people, from Europe coming in and saying, hey, I can find a home in Illinois. And so I just support you. And I just think it's interesting and curious in a good way that this gentleman started talking about that. It's there's a lot of blessing going on in Illinois and so thank you. I'm sorry. But I could talk to him about the military history, the 18th, 19th, 20th century, blue in the face. So my friend, James Bakunis, I'd be glad to compare notes. There's a lot of military history going on here in Illinois, and just the additional bonus is that Rabbi Turin is there to teach us the spiritual way rather than just the way of the sword, the way of the spirit.
Well, don't forget about Rabbi Turin Jr. in the Capitol.
Oh, he forgive me. He's my first mensch. He's my first mensch, if I may, if I'm using that term correctly.
Right.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone else?
Yeah, Rabbi, this is Aaron. I did notice that lately there's been a lot of activity all over the world in these new Noahide communities that are growing. And I think we're starting to coalesce, in all different kinds of areas. And I think Ask Noah is a Jewish organization that's been out there, pushing that information out there daily, answering questions in different groups. And then there's people in New Zealand, there's people in the Philippines, there's people in China. Just everywhere it's just starting to grow. So I'm wondering, is there going to be a push more for this growth? Because I mean, it could take on millions and millions and millions of people soon. So how would the Lubavitch handle all of those people?
That's a very good point. And I don't have a complete answer, but this is what I will say. Two sides to the coin. On the one hand, I think every individual has to whatever degree he can, take responsibility to do his share. We have to have outreach, and we have to try to influence and do whatever we can and not have the attitude, who am I? What am I? At best, I'll keep the laws. I can't do anything about it. No, you may not be able to have a following of thousands of people. Maybe you could, but do your share. And the flip side of that is no contradiction at all. At the end of the day, God runs the show. He determines what's going to happen. Yes, he commands us to do our efforts and to do what we can. But at the end of the day, everything's going to work out. And he's the one who has this master plan. We just don't know every single detail. So therefore, we're obligated and required, philosophically, to do our utmost and not rely on him. And at the same time, understand that we're relying on him. If you follow what I'm saying.
Yes.
James.
Thank you.
Yes, gentlemen, thank you. I was wondering, Rabbi Turin, if I know you mentioned the Rebbe being having foresight. I was wondering because I seem to remember when I was first learning, not within probably the last decade, if my memory is correct, that there's 620 letters in the 10 Commandments, 613 commandments for Jews, and the other 7 were kind of referred to at that time as rabbinical commands. And then now lately, over the last 5+ years or something like that, I've been hearing that, well, that thinking has changed, and those are probably more generally accepted as Noahide commandments. Any comments on that?
It's not a contradiction. It's 2 different interpretations, and therefore, as in many cases in Torah, we take them both. In other words, you don't have to have an extra 14 letters so that you can have 7 for this and 7 for that. The same 7, so to say, extra letters represent this as well as that. So they're both true. Anyone else?
Thank you, sir. That's I appreciate that. Thank you.
So, Rabbi, I do have another question.
Yes.
So I met Rabbi Cohen in New York, who is the representative for the UN for the Noahide.
Right. Rabbi, I know him well. Rabbi David, Yaakov David Cohen.
Yes. And he's representing us, I guess, at the UN. What does that mean? I'm not really sure.
I can't speak for him. You could contact him. I really don't know. I don't want to, speak for him when he's able to.
Well, I'm just wondering, is that like when you start looking at the growth of the communities and the international travel that's going to be involved and stuff like that, I'm wondering if he's foreshadowing that right now.
I think it's a good thing that we have someone who is in the UN, because after all said and done, which there's a lot to be said and done about the UN, at least ideally, theoretically, it's an amazing organization, in theory, which is uniting all the nations of the world for the sake of peace. And therefore, if you have a Jew there, knowledgeable, a follower of the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach, who's all about the 7 Noahide commandments, there, I think it's an amazing, wonderful thing that he's giving the proper representation, whatever he's able to do over there. But again, theoretically, he's part of, or he's working with the 70 nations.
So that goes back into what you were saying earlier when you were letting us know about Jews' obligations. So this is kind of that in a nutshell, just taking place right before our eyes.
Oh, sure. Big time. He's, in a certain sense, he is, I don't want to say alleviating the responsibility, but in a certain sense, he is representing all the Jews that are supposed to be doing that. Now, again, there's so much to be done, and it's all theoretical, because it's not like every human being on the planet checks in with the UN regularly in order to know what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. But perhaps on a spiritual level, the UN has some very good, powerful energy, and therefore the fact that he's there, but that's all, perhaps in spiritual, but I'm saying, but down to practical things, he's doing a good thing. No question about it. And it doesn't exempt anyone else, but it's at least a representation of what we're supposed to be.
Well, I like the idea because if someone has an issue, say that they want to bring before anyone in that building, he's there, right? Especially if it's a Noahide issue.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. Thank you.
Next time you're in New York, you can look him up.
He gave me his phone number. I'll probably give him a call.
Okay, very good.
That'd be the first time for me.
Okay. Send him my regards.
Certainly will.
Anyone
Can I
else?
ask? Yeah, can I ask a question, Rabbi? Yeah, I actually posted my question in the comment in the chat. So, but I'll just summarize it. That historically, there were eras wherein Jews actually actively converted others to Judaism, like during the Roman era, and also, for example, the Idumeans, where King Herod came from, they were forcibly converted to Judaism. So there's actually historical precedent wherein Jews were actively converting others. Is this active proselytizing conversion of by Jews forbidden now explicitly, or just common practice? Will it return maybe in the eve of Moshiach's arrival, or that's it? It's not gonna return anymore.
As a rule, legally, Jews are not allowed to seek out converts. The times in history where there was, so to say, massive conversions was in the times of King Solomon. And oftentimes we had problems with those converts, because in order to convert to Judaism, it's really supposed to be just because the person wants to embrace the religion and to serve God as a Jew, not out of fear and not out of material gain or political gain or honor or respect or whatever. In other words, if at the time the Jewish people are like on the height and they're really the greatest people on earth at the time, so a person wants to be on the winning team. That's not the idea. Nor for the other way around. Let's say someone is, they feel bad and they want to identify with the underdog. That's also not. So as a rule, Jews are not allowed to solicit and to look for converts.
I'm reading in the text.
Yeah.
He's also asking.
Just someone there?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. 1 second. No, okay.
Okay.
You're reading in the text.
Okay. I was reading in the text in Josephus, and I think it talks about in the Talmud during the Roman days, there was a lot of people coming in to convert.
That the Jews were seeking?
It gives that impression that, well, I guess that, yeah, I guess there was a lot of Jews, a lot of people were coming in to convert, and it was more of an active.
Well, there is a verse in the Megillas Esther, the story of Purim. So towards the end, when the Jews finally won this very, very scary near annihilation situation, and everything turned over for the better. So there's a verse there that says, V'rabim me'amei haaretz mis yahadim, which translated means, and many multitudes of the nations of the earth were becoming Jewish. So just read and translate it. It sounds like after all, you know, the miracle and the downfall of the villain and all that, and the Jews defeated their enemies, that then a lot of the nations of the world became Jewish. So even if that is what happened then, but it's not that the Jews were seeking them, and hopefully they wanted to become Jewish because they love the God of Israel and they want to be part of the chosen people. And since there is that option, they wanted to take that. But otherwise, again, historically, you have to know each case that you're talking about, what really was happening over there, and what's the data? What happened afterwards? You know, over the years. Like, for example, the first time that we find that a whole group, we don't know the number, but a whole group of non-Jews joined the bandwagon was when the Jews left Egypt. Moses, took what's called the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, on his own, because these were a bunch of people. They weren't Egyptians, and they weren't descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Joseph and Jacob, and they were living in Egypt at the time, and they wanted to join the Jewish people, be on the winning team. They just witnessed these crazy, crazy miracles. So they wanted to. And Moses' attitude basically was, why not? So he took them. And according to the tradition that we have, we only had trouble with them ever since.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Anyone else? All right. Next week we are off. Next week is hopefully going to be the greatest festival of all, the 9th of Av, the day that the world has been waiting for so long. The biggest holiday with the biggest feast in the third and final and eternal Beis HaMikdash. Because otherwise, for the past 2,000 years or so, it's been a fast day. And it's the saddest day on the Jewish calendar until we come to Mashiach, and then it's going to probably be the happiest day on the Jewish calendar. So, in any event, we're not meeting in this format next week. So I will hopefully see you all in 2 weeks. All right. Until then, everyone be well.
All right. Have a great day. Great night.
Too.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Be well, everybody.
Amen.
Thank you.